How can we explain a person's power to predict the future?
The reading tells you where you might be going and maybe why you're stuck.
When you call this energy in and you're coming from the right space, they can assist us.
What gives someone the power to speak to dead people or to know what others are thinking?
I meditate, I connect with my own guides and my energies.
If there are ghosts, then we've survived death, and I think people like to think that. It's comforting for them.
How can someone get information hidden from our normal senses? Is it a talent, a gift, or something supernatural?
They do appear to know things that they should not know. It remains a mystery.
Either way, it's unexplained.
There's a lot of unknowns around it.
Knowing something before it has happened, speaking to the spirit world, making claims about future events. It all sounds far-fetched, but countless amounts of people believe in the power.
It's a $2 billion industry a year. So it just shows you how much money can actually be made from it.
And many believe in their ability to speak to or be contacted by the other world. So what's it all about?
It's to do with being able to tell people what their lives are going to be like down the road, what kind of things influenced them in the past, knowing things about you that you think they couldn't possibly have known, and also healing and putting you in touch with people who have passed.
If the person comes to me with a problem or an issue, the tarot cards will reveal those problems and issues to help people navigate their way through life and give them some spiritual guidance.
I work with a team, guides, who work with me to help me know what to say. Even now, I'm working with them as to know what to say. That would be hard. And for me, my whole intention and purpose is to help people be the best version of themselves. I'm coming from a space of kindness and grace and, you know, a place where I want to help people.
I help people sort out their lives. It's like people come to me who are not happy, who are having relationship problems, who feel stuck and at crossroads is a great complaint. They don't know where to go next. They feel they've been stuck for a long time. And some of them come for readings, hoping that I might see which is the best direction for them to go in. The main use of palmistry, the way I was taught it, was that it warns people what's up ahead so they can avoid it. It's like driving up the M1, somebody giving you a sort of update on the state of the traffic. And if you like what's ahead, well, you just sit back and let it happen. If you don't like what's ahead, well, then you've got, you know, time to see what you can do about it. So obviously, I mean, if something ghastly is going to happen in 10, 20 years' time, you've got plenty of time to avoid it and think of, you know, ways around it or whatever. If it's going to happen next week, it's another matter.
And people from all walks of life swear by the power of psychics and the less supernaturally based practice of astrology. President Ronald Reagan's wife, Nancy, believed that her life and that of her husband were guided by supernatural forces.
Ronald Reagan's wife, who consulted the psychics, took advice from an astrologer and would try to influence Ronald Reagan in terms of his diary as a consequence of her discussions.
But while many people believe in psychic abilities, the scientific consensus is that there is no proof of existence of such powers, and describes the practice as pseudoscience. But are we foolish to dismiss such claims? Some are astonished by the power.
I was only 17 years old and I was working on a radio station in London. The night before I saw this psychic, the radio station closed down unexpectedly. I sat down with the psychic the next day and she said to me, "I can see you working in radio, but there's a problem." So I said, "Well, too right, it closed down last night." And I don't think there's any way she could have actually known that. I wasn't famous for my work in radio. It was a very small radio station. It wasn't in the newspapers. It was literally 8 hours after the station doors had locked.
The power of psychics can also be put to hugely positive use.
It does appear that some police forces have successfully used psychics to solve cases such as missing children or unsolved murders. While several police forces will deny that they use these psychics, there does seem to be some evidence that some criminals have been brought to justice. Everybody has some degree of extrasensory perception. You might watch some of these real police programs and you might see a policeman talk about developing policeman's nose. They appear to know which car has got the cocaine in. I'm not saying that they knew there was cocaine in it, but they knew which car just looks a little bit suspicious. Mother's intuition. I believe that human beings have some ability to have an awareness of their surroundings, and the theory is that psychics exercise that ability to develop this super psi power.
Psychikos, meaning of the mind, is the origin of the word psychic, first used in the English language in the mid-1800s. Elaborate systems of divination and fortune-telling date back to ancient times. Perhaps the most widely known system of early civilization fortune-telling was astrology. Some fortune-tellers were said to be able to make predictions without the use of astrology, through some sort of direct apprehension or vision of the future. In ancient times, they became known as seers or prophets.
Psychics have been around for a long time in the shape of shamans, witch doctors, and oracles. People would consult them as a consequence of that. Psychics going back to ancient societies have held positions of power because of their supposed connection with esoteric knowledge. And they advised leaders and advised people generally as to how to conduct their lives, and people took it seriously.
The Pythia, the priestess presiding over the Oracle of Apollo at Delphi, was believed to be able to deliver prophecies inspired by Apollo during rituals beginning in the 8th century BC. But by far, the most enduring historical references to what some consider to be psychic ability is the prophecies of Nostradamus in the 16th century. Nostradamus was a French seer who wrote collections of prophecies that have since become famous worldwide and have rarely been out of print since his death. He predicted over 6,000 events, disasters such as plagues, earthquakes, droughts, floods, invasions, and battles. And in the Middle Ages, a new form of predictive power emerged, the tarot.
Tarot cards were developed in Italy in the 1500s as a means of fortune telling.
The oldest surviving deck is in Italy called the Visconti Sforza deck. The cards have been discovered in different parts of the world, but the history around the cards is pretty mysterious and unknown. I feel anyone can learn to read the tarot cards. They are a deck of 78 cards that help you understand and reveal any energies around your unconscious. So you can learn the meaning of each card and you can learn to read them and uncover the mysteries. I love doing readings, the information and the insight you get from a person, and I love working with people, I love helping them, I love doing my best to help them heal and work through any problems they're going through. It's a really, really fulfilling, wonderful job to do.
But like all things which might be rooted in the supernatural, the power of the psychic is inevitably exploited because of its popularity. In times past and up to the current day, the world of the genuine psychic has been exploited by stage performers.
Basic techniques that are used in relation to psychics are cold reading and warm reading. And cold reading is basically where the psychic will throw out a lot of questions very quickly to somebody and watch for their reaction to what's being thrown out. And particularly you can see this when psychics are working with a group.
And this is linked to something called the Barnum effect. It's named after P.T. Barnum, the famous circus showman, who famously said, "There's a sucker born every minute," which relates to people's gullibility.
Stage performers reel in their audiences with what has become known as Barnum statements.
A Barnum statement is a very vague statement that you could say to pretty much anybody and it would resonate to some degree. For example, if you talk to a young lady in her 20s, you might mention that you can sense that she has a broken heart, because most young women in their 20s have suffered a broken heart. An older person, you might say, "I can feel there's a loving spirit energy of a female." A lot of people of a certain age will have lost a grandmother or a mother.
A psychic might have a room full of people and might ask the room, does anyone know a John who's had a heart attack? The likelihood is, out of all those people, there's going to be someone who knows a John who's had a heart attack.
It's not the psychic that's doing the reading, it's the person in the audience that's doing the reading. They feed a huge amount of information to the psychic.
It's a clever way of making vague assumptions, and if people are in that believers category, then they're willing to accept those assumptions.
Warm reading, on the other hand, is more dubious. The psychic will wander around in the foyer, say before an event, listening to what's going on, listening to what people are saying, or will have some plants there doing that. The most common way that they did it was to either have somebody in the audience who would wander around outside and pick up information, and they were connected with a microphone to the psychic. And the other way was the psychic themselves would often wander around and get it.
There was a famous television medium by the name of Derek Acorah. He was working on a paranormal TV show and they were doing a live broadcast. The idea was that Derek Acorah did not know the location or anything about it until he arrived on set. One of the parapsychologists on the show, Dr. Kieran O'Keefe, actually visited the site early in the day and commented that a South African slave had died in that location and his name was Creed Kafer. Later on in the show, Derek Acorah gets possessed by the ghost of Creed Kafer. Creed Kafer is actually an anagram of Derek Faker. Dr. Kieran O'Keefe had set up this misinformation, suspecting that a member of the crew would feed that information to Derek Acorah, which they did, and consequently Derek Acorah went along with this misinformation and was exposed.
The international mind reader Uri Geller claims not only to be able to read minds, but to also have the power of telekinesis, the ability to move objects without physical interaction. He claims he influenced the outcome of an international soccer game in 1996.
I remember this very, very well. It was Tony Adams who brought down a Scottish player and the penalty was awarded to Scotland. Gary McAllister was about to take the penalty and there's clear footage of the ball moving 2 inches to the right before Gary McAllister kicked it, allowing David Seaman, the goalkeeper, to make the save. Uri Geller claimed that he was in a helicopter above Wembley Stadium watching this penalty kick about to be taken and he willed the ball to move. Whether or not we can actually say Uri Geller definitely made the ball move, it's really hard to actually ascertain. We only know that he said this after the event.
So is it possible that the Israeli psychic moved the ball?
I do think, however, if Uri Geller had that kind of power, England should have won that tournament instead of just that game.
One person who made it his business to undermine the world of psychics was James Randi.
Randi became very interested in the fact that people were being duped in this manner, and he decided to investigate and check up on some of them. Now, a lot of psychics have been studied by scientists, but they're much better off having an experienced magician watching what's going on. James Randi also offered a $1 million prize to anybody who could demonstrate psychic ability. But this $1 million was never claimed, because once people who have claimed to have these abilities are brought in and tested under controlled conditions, the ability disappears.
Lawrence Livermore Labs has a bunch of physicists working there, and I got a call from one of them a couple of years back. Said, "Oh boy, your $1 million prize. It's won. It's gone. That's it. Say goodbye to it." Said, "How come?" Well, a physicist from Israel came over here and brought with him a fellow named Ronnie Marcus. Ronnie Marcus was doing the Uri Geller act, bending spoons and reading the contents of sealed envelopes and good stuff like this, all stuff which has been in the magician's repertoire for generations now. This is what fooled him at Lawrence Livermore Labs. He asked them to get him a box of matches, just a box of, this hasn't got many matches left in it, 5 or 6 matches. Ordinary box of matches, and of course, being scientists, they examined it with laser beams, scanned it in infrared and ultraviolet, and they gave it to Ronnie Marcus, and he said, well, this is a proof of what we call in the trade psychokinesis, and this is what he did. He placed it in the back of his hand like this, and he said to them, "Oops," he said, "watch. The box will actually begin to rise. Look at this. It's rising. It's actually rising in the back of the hand." And it rose up, and then he said, "And then when I relax the psychic power, it sinks back down again." Now, I don't know how it was done. But I'm working on it.
So who is right and who is wrong? Some psychics believe they have connections in the spirit world, often the wrong sorts of spirits.
As well as the heavenly kingdom, there's the angelic kingdom, but also there's a negative place somewhere out in time and space that's full of evil intent and demonic creatures that are full of spite and hatred. There was recently a case in New York City where a client was told that her child was possessed by a demon. And this person spent tens of thousands of dollars to the psychic.
And one story has dominated psychic predictions over the last decade.
There was a famous case in the UK of a young child going missing. Her name's Madeleine McCann. She went missing in Portugal. A lot of psychics use social media to promote themselves by trying to make out they knew where she was or they knew what had happened to her. Very distasteful, very, very low class, if you ask me. A family were grieving, a child has probably suffered in the worst ways, and a lot of psychics were using that event to promote their own name. Whether it's a psychic scammer or a builder or any other kind of person who's offering a professional service, they should face the full extent of the law. They should be fined heavily and maybe even imprisoned, because the effects they can have on people and their families could be absolutely devastating.
But some seemingly rational people have gone to great lengths to believe what the spirits or the stars have in store for them. And their advice could have changed the course of history. Believing what people with an alleged connection with the other world say about the future appears to guide many famous people's lives.
There's a huge proportion of celebrities and directors and film producers who use psychics or intuitive guides, as they like to call them. The likes of Jennifer Aniston, George Clooney, Brad Pitt, Sarah Jessica Parker, Cameron Diaz, Ron Howard, the director, the Kardashians.
And some of these psychics can offer very, very bad advice because they don't know the industry that they're trying to pass comment on, leaving a lot of these celebrities or musicians to be in very vulnerable positions where they make bad financial decisions.
I think they're looking for that hit of certainty in what is essentially an industry that is rife with uncertainty.
But surely the most bizarre reliance on otherworldly advice was the relationship between President Ronald Reagan's wife and her astrological advisors.
Nancy Reagan would constantly have an astrologist, like, by her side. She's like, what are the stars aligning today? What should I focus on today? Because she truly, truly believed that the alignment of the stars and the moon and the planets and whatnot were going to have a big effect.
Nancy Reagan enlisted the help of psychic astrologer Joan Quigley after the assassination attempt on her husband. And actually, in a later date, Joan Quigley was reported as saying if she'd been hired earlier, she would have predicted the assassination attempt itself. Joan Quigley said she was responsible for quite a lot of incidences and goings-on in the White House during their time there. She was responsible for the takeoff and landing of Air Force One, to conferences, timings of debates. Apparently, Reagan waited to speak to Quigley before he signed the disarmament agreement with Gorbachev in the 80s. Which means that Joan Quigley was partly responsible for the end of the Cold War.
The power of the psychic, talent, professional magic, or something supernatural that we simply can't explain.
I'd like to think if it helps people, then great. And, you know, if it's harmless enough and if it's not predicting the future, then I think it's okay.
whatever people take from the session is what they take. From my experience, most people are extremely happy. Of course, there's been the odd person who wouldn't like it, but that's where they're at. Maybe they don't want to hear what's been said.
There are psychic fairs, and one of the things to note about it is that nobody is critical of anybody else. Whereas in mainstream science and mainstream medicine, people are used to going to conferences and being challenged and asked questions.
I believe that some definitely appear to have abilities which would require a lot more investigation. They do appear to know things that they should not know.
I don't try to convince people of anything, really. I just work with people who have the faith and the belief in what we're doing here.
You can't judge all clairvoyants and all psychics because you have one bad experience. Often those people are frightened. They are frightened of there being something that they can't understand.
So if somebody comes to me and they are a skeptic or they're a non-believer, there'll be a barrier or blockage up and I won't be able to read for them. So in terms of trying to prove anything to anybody, no, that's not my job.